Okay, we left the last part one video with finishing up the employee object, and what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of bring everything together um, uh, using the import statement and declaring packages. So one thing about Java is that it controls libraries with packages, so you can have multiple objects in a specifically named package. So it's kind of like it's a namespace essentially. And in other languages, you would have like C or C++ include this file dot blah or dot h or something like that, and you would then have a using namespace statement. And Java has a similar mechanism for controlling objects and making sure each object has its own namespace, so that the variables that you have inside of that object, including the object's name itself, is protected. Because there's a lot of clock objects out there. There's a lot of employee objects out there. Seriously, how many employee objects do you think there might be out there for different things? So Java controls that with package management. And so what that means is, for our employee object that we left off with, we need to declare a package for it, or declare it as a specific namespace for that whole object. And we're going to do that inside of the object employee. And then what we're going to do is we're going to import that package or namespace with, and that's going to open up the ability for us to access what's inside the namespace, or the package, the object itself, which is the employee object or the production worker object that we're going to be creating here. So in the interest of expediency, and because we've already gone through and built the traits of good traits of an object, I'm going to do a little bit of copy paste, but I'm going to show you kind of everything, how it goes. And this is going to be kind of how you put multiple files all together to make them work, and essentially have a base master, or a master class that you can use with inheritance. So first thing what we're going to do is we're going to go to our source packages here, and we have I'm going to go ahead and throw it in again so you guys can see it from beginning to end, what we're going to be doing. I'm going to go ahead and go here. I'm going to say new Java class. I'm going to call this one employee, and we're going to put that in source packages. We're going to hit finish, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the code that we've already created and bring it in. Those are the 4 characteristics that we completed. And what we want to do then is we want to now take this code, this object that we've created, and we want to declare it as a package. We want to say that it has a namespace, and that's going to allow us to import the employee and have the package declared. Oh, and you're going to need a semicolon here, I believe. Oops, Control Z. I'm going to zoom in here for you so you guys can see this a little bit better. There we go. That's gonna. Oh, let's open this up a little bit more for you. There we go. So there is our package employee. I believe that should be should be good. Now, here's where it's going to say, hey, it's in the wrong folder. Go ahead and just say move to correct folder. I'm wondering if that's a NetBeans thing, but you know, if it shows up, go ahead and do that. So now this is ready. This object is ready to be instantiated in another class, or yeah, in another class. And we can actually get started on that in main and test it out. But we are going to also extend it into the secondary object that we're going to be creating here shortly. So let's go ahead and give this one a good test. Verify everything's going well. And we will continue on with the next object in the inheritance hierarchy. Okay, so I'm going to take the employee package that I declared, and I'm going to go ahead and import it and into my main function. And then I am going to instantiate an employee, and now I should be able to run this and have it see that there is an employee imported and compile, or compile and run. Okay, so it looks like we had that, but what I really want to look at is two things that are going to, two characteristics. And that is printing the object itself and verifying that our toString actually works. So right here we can do a set a breakpoint, and we can actually examine that happening. We can do a step into and look at the constructor overload that we actually had running. And then we can, I don't know, if we try to do a step into here, we'll see if it'll actually do it, but a better thing to do is just go in here and set a breakpoint, and then you can just see that that was called, and you can just do a step over. So I'll do a step over here, and there's our toString call for our employee object that we're running the print on. It's going to return the string for the print function. I'm going to go ahead and just hit continue, and then here's our output that we just verified that the toString function was running. So that's testing the object, including it, packaging it, and we're going to now, we don't really need this import now, because the next thing that we're going to be implementing is a production worker. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say new Java class, and we're going to give it a name, production worker, and I'm going to hit finish here. Now the production worker is going to have some characteristics that we're going to talk about as we progress. The biggest characteristic that the production worker is going to have is the fact that it's going to inherit from employee. But before it can inherit from employee, we have to import the employee. And we already got the actual code for that. We have this import right here statement that we're going to be using. for our production worker. And then we're going to be able to implement the actual inheritance, because now we're including that code. So we're going to implement the inheritance by saying extends employee. Now we have several responsibilities that we have to deal with for our production worker. Our production worker is going to have to implement its own constructor and also call the base classes constructor. Our production worker is also going to have to overload the toString method and call the base or the superclasses or the base classes toString method. And so that is first done by, hey, inheriting employee, but this is the code that we're going to I'm going to examine and discuss with you. And we're going to go ahead and run it through the debugger so you can kind of visualize what's going on. Okay, so first thing that we have is we have our production worker constructor, our default constructor. Now there's a curious little call here to super. So it's actually calling the super class or the base class. And that is because, hey, if we're inheriting from the employee class, we have responsibilities because there are specific things that happen in a base classes constructor for it to be usable. So you must overload it, and not only that, but you're responsible for calling the constructor of the base or the superclass. Then you can take what you add on and do your initialization. Now that works kind of differently when you add into the override, is because now a production worker, you need to actually send the parts of a production worker that is an employee. So I got to send the employee information and the production worker information to the production worker's overrided or overloaded constructor. And then what happens is I've got to call the superclass's overloaded constructor, which if we look in the superclass, which is employee, the overloaded constructor is well, if I can get there in NetBeans, is this guy right here. And here is our default constructor. And here's our override, or our toString override, which is another responsibility of the derived class. So if we go back to the production worker class that extends employee, and we look at now the fact that our constructor calls the constructor of its superclass, then it assigns the values it needs to. So it's very important that you follow that order. The base class is constructed always first, and then you finish up the derived classes construction. The last one being the toString overload. Notice here, very critical, the super.toString call. That's calling the toString overload in our employee object. That's this guy right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just take an overview look at the production worker code. It inherits from employee. It implements its own constructor, calls the base class's default constructor. Implements its own default constructor. Default meaning sends no arguments. No arguments are sent. Things are just assigned a 0 or a null state. Overloaded constructor. This is when you need to send all the data needed to construct that object, including anything needed or any overrides or overloads of the base classes or the superclasses overloaded or overridden constructors. You could have multiple constructors that you call upon here inside of the superclass instead of just one, depending on how you want to use it and the different routes you set for constructing your object. So it's important that, you know, hey, if you're setting up so that you can send data to the one object and have it circulate and navigate down to the very base class set of data, then do it that way. You know, call the base class or the constructor of your base class your overload, and that's an important trait to implement. And of course, that's your responsibility also when you inherit. And then we have here the overload of the return and calling the super of the toString, and that's going to be what we demonstrate here shortly. So let's go ahead and look at how it all kind of runs together with a breakpoint, and you guys can play with it from here. So let's go back to main. We're going to include ProductionWorker, which in itself includes employee. So we should be able to instantiate an employee, but we'll see. And then what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate a production worker. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to declare that I want a production worker variable called PT, and then I'm going to instantiate that object, the production worker object, but I'm going to implement the constructor overload. And notice how I'm taking that 34.45 literal and casting it to a float. Because I built the constructor to accept a float. So now, once we've got this thing kind of doing its, I think we forgot one thing when I actually implemented. We got a package employee, but production worker. Let's look at production worker. Yeah. So I brought in all that code, and I forgot the last thing. We need to declare a package for this guy. Okay, so that's the kind of last little bit that make sure you declare the package up above, and then when it brings you this little error, click on it and say move class to correct folder. I'm pretty sure that's a NetBeans issue. We'll here, and we're going to import. I should pop up. I've got it grayed out up above, but you can do your import, and if all works well, yep, there it is. It should pop up for you, and you can end it with a semicolon. And that gives us access to the namespace and the object, the production worker object, so that we can instantiate it. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and add in the code to instantiate our production worker, and then we're going to examine kind of what happens. The next bit is to print the production worker. And we're going to set a breakpoint, and we're going to look at those characteristics of inheritance, such as proper constructor overloading and proper toString calls. And I'm going to go ahead and hit play, debug up here. And guys, do your best to debug as much as possible. It's very, very helpful. So I'm going to do what's called a step into now, and then we're going to be able to examine what's going on with this call, which is going to actually call our constructor. So here's my step into. Now, as I should, as should the production worker, has constructor's been called, the overload, and the name and the number was passed in, but it's our responsibility to call the superclass or the employee or the base class its constructor and pass the data along that it should get as part of what it needs for initialization. And so I'm going to do a step into there. We're going to see kind of what goes on at that point. Here we go. So now we get to our very base class and we fully implement the constructor. We're doing a step over, the name and the number has been assigned, and we come back out. Now we say, okay, well, we did our responsibility. Our base or our superclass's constructor has been called appropriately. Let's go ahead and implement our stuff, which is the production worker stuff, which is hourly rate. You're going to be actually putting in the shift also. So I'm going to go ahead and assign that value that was passed in, and then that object has been properly constructed. Now, when we print the object, the PT object that I just called here, our toString method is going to be called. So I'm not going to do the step into here because it calls a bunch of system-based kind of write statements. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead into the production worker toString method and set up breakpoint, just so you can visualize kind of what's going on here. So now I'm going to go ahead and go back to the code, and we're going to do a step over. And since the runtime is right here on line 22 where I print it, it's going to go ahead and run the toString method, and we're going to be able to examine kind of what's going on. So I'm going to do a step over. Here's our toString method. Now notice it's calling the production worker toString because that's appropriate. It is a production worker type. But also notice that we are calling the supers, or our subclasses, toString method. So that's our responsibility. So I'm going to go ahead and do a step into, and we're going to see how that behaves. Okay, step into, and here we are in employee, and we are calling our toString method, and we're passing out or returning the data that we want shown when we print our object. So every object should have some kind of override for a toString, just for diagnostics, if anything. So I'm going to go ahead and do a step over here. And now that toString has returned the value, which is what was built in the other toString method of the employee, and it's going to concatenate it onto the hourly rate here, which I can't pronounce for some reason, which will then print the hourly rate of production worker. The rate of production worker. I'll just keep it at that. So let's go ahead and do a step over. And I'm just going to hit play, and it's going to run into the end, and it's going to have our output, which is John, number 1234, rate of $34.45. Okay, guys, that's putting everything kind of together, building objects and separating them out into their own namespace packages, and then including them, and then also implementing inheritance and appropriately implementing inheritance, and kind of just basically all around getting everything working in one project, so that you can start exercising your ability to author objects and also start really kind of doing things that are pretty significant, like working with objects, graphical user interface type objects, different things that you have available to you once you start understanding how imports work, how to include code that's out there and available for you to use that somebody else has built, kind of like third-party code. Alrighty, let's go ahead and take one quick look. I'm going to go ahead and give you a good quick look of employee. Okay, so we've got our package declaration. We call employee. We have our getters, setters. Remember, you're going to be adding stuff there. Then we have our toString method. Okay, and then I implemented the production worker. We have it declared as a package or namespace. Then we have it extending from employee, so we've got to import that. Then we declare the class, our additions, and every bit of code that goes from everything that we discussed, all the way down to the overload of the toString method. Okay, and then testing. That's all I care about, is that you set your data, print your data. That's what I'm looking for. And so these are kind of some of the characteristics that I'll see in your projects that you're giving to me, your multi-file, multi-object projects that you're going to be authoring. Thank you.